Fans of Star Wars love ships, but you can't grow a ship without them getting some exercise in the shipyard. And today we're going to be talking about the biggest shipyards in different phases of galactic history, starting with the dawn of the Republic. Places like Kuat and Mon Calamari may be among the most famous shipyards of the modern period under the Empire and New Republic, but they didn't always hold that title. On top of the shifting title holder for biggest shipyard, what it meant to be a shipyard world also shifted over time. As the galaxy consolidated, it was more common for a planet to become known for one thing, but especially earlier on, shipyards may only have been one of a planet's varied interests. In the earliest days of the Republic, the largest or at least most established worlds for shipbuilding included Corellia and Duro, whose shipbuilding industries were bolstered by their claims to be the originators of the hyperspace technology which allowed the Republic to grow in the first place. There was also Rendili, which had developed orbital shipyard docks centuries before the Republic's founding, and worlds like Axum, which already had a strong martial tradition which included ship construction. These are names which would remain prominent in galactic shipbuilding for millennia, even if they don't always occupy the top spot. But there's another shipyard which itself didn't remain quite as prominent, even if at this point in the early Republic, context clues point to it holding the top spot for a little bit. This planet was Perlemia. You may recognize the name from the Perlemian trade route, one of the major hyperlanes of the galaxy, and the one along which most early exploration was done. It's not a planet that gets mentioned much anymore for a reason we'll talk about soon, but the hyperlane was named after the planet, whose orbital shipyards produced many of the ships responsible for scouting it. And while these Republic shipyards may hog a lot of the spotlight simply by being in the Republic, they weren't alone in their shipmaking prowess. On the fringes of the galaxy in the Tion cluster, other shipyards achieved similar heights around this time. The Tianese Empire, established by Zur VIII and his son Zim the Despot, converted a conquered region called the Thanium Worlds into an industrial hotbed of activity, which included several shipyards, although not necessarily centralized on any specific planet the same way. We do know specific shipyard locations included Brygia, Kron, and Barankar, where Zim's flagships were built. The design of one of them, the Ibon Scimitar, would come to inspire several later designs used by the shipyards in the Republic, thanks to the galaxy's long tradition of plagiarism. The Scimitar led to a long line of designs, culminating the Atgir and then Invincible, which was still in service in the time of the Empire. The wars between the Republic and Tianese, and then Tianese and Hutts, contributed to the rise and fall of various shipyards in this early period as well, and this is a trend you'll notice repeatedly throughout Star Wars history, where it's usually a war that causes one shipyard to rise or fall in prominence. Very few shipyards grow super large through purely civilian construction, although you could argue that while Corellia falls in prominence among military shipbuilders at least a little bit, its massive civilian production of things like the YT freighters keeps it near the top. But the shipyards of Perlemia, well fabled by this point according to the Essential Guide to Warfare, lay along the direct path down the Perlemian between the Tianese and the Republic. So barely a millennia past the Republic's founding, Perlemia was laid to waste by the Tianese, essentially never to be heard from again. By this point, another shipyard had also become more prominent than any other in the Republic, Forost. In yet another trend, the Republic had essentially no standing navy before the Tianese invasion, but Forost, a colony world of the planet Caecilius, became one of the central shipyards and even headquarters of the navy, hastily built to defend against the Tianese. Other worlds like Perlemia did contribute to this, but again, Perlemia was right along the invasion path, so it fell before a lot of the shipbuilding could begin in earnest. While Forost was deep within the core and well out of the way of any invasion. This war with the Republic and then conflicts with the Hutts ultimately checked Tianese ambitions, and the subjugation of Tianese space meant that it would take a long time before any shipyards in this region could compete with the core again. After this war, most production in the Republic did also return to civilian production, as the standing navy was once again disbanded once the threat had been dealt with. Nearly 10,000 years later, the Republic reinstituted a standing navy, and the need for more ships to create it led to even more planets joining the ranks of major galactic shipyards, including Abhian, Alantine, and Byblos, planets which were more towards the mid-rim than the core, where shipbuilding power traditionally lay. But Forost and Rendili were pretty unquestionably at the top tier of ship production from here on, at least in terms of overall scale. It's likely that Corellia was close, although a lot of their output, as we mentioned, was in civilian smaller craft. The Corellian Engineering Corporation, or CEC, would still claim to be the oldest shipbuilder in the galaxy, but in practice much of Corellian shipbuilding was split between a variety of different companies which would, at one point or another, come together under the CEC banner. CEC may also stand for Corey's Enjoyable Content, which you can enjoy more of by liking this video and subscribing for more. This was the state of affairs for roughly the next 10,000 years as well, though we should note that following the Hutt cataclysm around 15,000 BBY, the capital of Hutt space moved from their homeworld Varl to Nal Hutta. And Nal Hutta also became a major shipbuilding world over time. Unlike many other planets though, its massive shipbuilding facilities were planet-side. The 20 square kilometer Gwarja shipyards, for example, were able to produce the Dorbula class, a fairly large warship, especially considering that it was made on the ground and not in orbit. Ground-based dry docks aren't exactly rare, but you don't usually see significant construction in them. Usually you'd expect that things get made on the ground and then brought up to be completed in orbit. Other planets in and around Hutt space would also get pretty famous for their shipbuilding, like Ubrikia. But again, from this 15,000 to 5,000 BBY period, I do think you have to put Forost and Rendili at the top. And soon, in my opinion at least, Rendili would take the unquestionable top spot. Forost remained incredibly prominent until the wars with the Sith, particularly the Great Hyperspace War around 5,000 years before the Empire, and then the Great Sith War and the war with Darth Revan about 1,000 years after that. In both of these latter two conflicts, the Sith at the time, Ulla Qel-Droma and then Darth Revan, captured vast numbers of Republic ships from the Forost shipyards, which probably indicates some security issues, with these stolen vessels being used to launch hugely damaging campaigns against the Republic. From this point forward, we don't really hear as much about Forost. It's certainly still a significant shipbuilding world, but it's eventually sold off to the Techno Union and never really occupies the same position in galactic history as it once did. Being sold off to these private megacorporations doesn't necessarily indicate its output was lower, especially at this point, when we know in the build-up to the Clone Wars that private entities did have bigger navies, but unfortunately we really don't have much solid information to go off of for this period, and then by the time we do start getting it again, we're back to the national militaries and their providers being the most prominent. So if Forost suffers, Rendili on the other hand remains a mainstay for the next several thousand years, with different iterations of companies being based there, from Rendili Hyperworks to Rendili Star Drives, providing the Republic with long-serving classes like the Thronta, the Hammerhead, and Praetorian. After the New Sith Wars, when the Republic disbanded its military with the Ruusan Reformations once again, Rendili still managed to stay relevant, providing the judicial forces of the Republic, along with various individual planetary defense forces, with a variety of vessels. They even undertook an increasingly common strategy for major shipbuilding worlds, where they would establish branches of their own shipyards on other rim worlds with plentiful resources, extracting them and building more ships either locally or with parts and materials shipped back to Rendili itself. The lack of a standing galactic military came with restrictions on what was legally allowed for different ship sizes, but these restrictions had a massive loophole, where prototypes and experimental vessels could be of any size, ostensibly to encourage innovation, but it meant even during this relatively peaceful time, shipyards like Rendili were massively increasing not just output, but the scale of vessels being created. Another world, while still in Rendili's shadow, would become increasingly prominent during this period, building several of these large so-called demonstration vessels. This was Kuat. Kuat had always held aspirations of galactic importance as a shipwright, but had never quite achieved a position as strong as Rendili or Forost in the earlier eras. But as the Clone Wars approached, the contract to secretly build the massive navy required by the Republic went to Kuat drive yards, not Rendili. Rendili still remained prominent, developing the Dreadnought heavy cruiser, which would be a standard, reliable vessel in most navies for basically the next century, but Kuat established secret ship and vehicle building facilities on the planet Rathana, which was also a significant source of natural resources for shipbuilding. Throughout the war, there would be some competition between the two worlds to outshine each other, but also some cooperation. The Victor Initiative project saw the two working together on building the Victory-class Star Destroyer, under the leadership of Walix and Lyra Blissex. Lyra had already worked for Kuat Drive Yards designing the Venator, while her father Walix had worked at Rendili. Following the Clone Wars, Lyra, who had designed the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, stayed on with KDY, while Walix joined the Rebellion and later the New Republic. The CIS also maintained several large shipyards on worlds like Mamont, or even just in the intergalactic void, but many of these wouldn't survive the transition to Empire, where Kuat became even more of the poster child for galactic shipbuilding success. Planets like Rendili would remain somewhat important, with other formerly minor players like Fondor becoming increasingly more important, but most major projects involve going through or working alongside KDY at some point or another. Most shipyards started putting out Imperial Star Destroyers, which was a KDY design. When the New Republic took power and eventually took Kuat, Kuat remained a fairly important shipyard. But thanks to Mon Calamari's position as the biggest shipbuilder in the rebellion, and as the homeworld of New Republic Supreme Commander Admiral Akbar, Mon Calamari soon arguably displaced it at the top of the shipyard power rankings. They went from putting out passenger liners and exploration vessels during the Clone Wars and before, to state-of-the-art warships forming the backbone of the New Republic's fleet, including eventually the massive Mediator and even the Viscount class, competing with the scale of Kuat's output in size, if not in absolute produced volume. During the Yuzon Vong War, an under-construction Viscount-class Star Dreadnought, the Krikana, was even sent from Mon Calamari to help Kuat in its defense, although unfortunately the ship was destroyed en route by the Yuzon Vong. In this war, which went from 25 to 29 ABY, many planets were completely devastated, while Mon Calamari remained safe until the end stages of the war, helping their relative output even more. We basically see the reverse of what happened earlier on in galactic history, where worlds in the core benefited by staying relatively safe from massive invasion vectors, mostly just getting attacked in civil wars that either wouldn't have the same devastating effects, or where these worlds being protected was still a big consideration. In the Yuzon Vong War, the Yuzon Vong took a lot of the core, and they had no desire to preserve what was already there. They hated mechanical technology, so protecting shipyards wasn't on their agenda at all. Mon Calamari remained a major production yard for the Galactic Alliance, which replaced the New Republic for the next century, with designs like the Scythe. Kuat also stayed fairly relevant, with Kuat Drive Yards producing the Pelion class at an unknown point, but it's also possible that Kuat Drive Yards in this case referred not to a company on Kuat itself, but subsidiaries based on planets like Yaga Minor, one of the most important shipyards in the Imperial Remnant since they had been relegated entirely to the Rim. Although when Kuat was taken back by the Fel Empire, which became Krait's Empire about 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, it almost certainly took the top spot once again. And that's the state of things at the end of Star Wars Legends. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree with my choices or if another shipyard deserves to be highlighted. If you did enjoy the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more, and I hope to see you next time.